Good morning, Cardinals players and parents, and welcome to another Cardinals Dugout Session. This is number 3. I'm Coach Monaghan from the North Jersey Cardinals, and our guest this morning, well, he's somebody, I was joking with him earlier this week, you really don't want to have to ever meet him.
That's
So,
right.
Dr. Greg Spatz, good morning and welcome.
Good morning. Thanks, Jim. Thanks for having me on.
So we'll give you a little bit of a background on Greg here. I did want our players to see this before we continue. This is Dan Servette. This was a tweet he put out the other day. He is the president of PBR Report in New York, the state of New York, and also works with PBR in Pennsylvania. PBR stands for Prep Baseball Report. If you are thinking of playing at the higher level, like as in college, Prep Baseball Report is a thing that you'll see a lot of on social media. And just the other day, Dan tweeted out something that I thought was very, very important. Over the last 2 months, and this was general for all levels of baseball, you should have been working out daily, increasing your flexibility, doing skill work, getting some throwing, hitting defensive work in, and studying the game. So have you been doing that? And obviously the weather's getting nicer. We have some restrictions that have been lifted. So sooner or later, we're going to get baseball back. Our guest today, as I mentioned, is Dr. Greg Spatz. He went to the College of New Jersey in Ewing, where he played on the baseball team there, worked as a strength and conditioning coach in the Arizona Diamondbacks organization, and he is the co-founder and owner of Resilient Performance Systems, which is located in Chatham and New York City. You can find their information at resilientperformance.com. They also have links on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, and you can see their email address as well. So, Greg, good morning and welcome. I want to start with a question, and that would be, what's the most common mistake that you see young athletes make when they're training?
Most common mistake with training, as in off the field training type stuff?
Yes.
Usually I would say it's not doing enough to prepare yourself so that you aren't having an injury when you do get to things like playing a full season of baseball, throwing regularly, when you don't have as much time to do those other things. So it depends on your age, of course, depends on what you have access to exercise-wise for like equipment and coaching and things like that. But oftentimes my athletes come to see me because they haven't done enough to get ready for their season. So then it's like, early in the season, they probably feel pretty good. You can kind of get by, and then things start to add up. And as the weeks go on, you might get stiffer. You might lose some range of motion in how your shoulder rotates. And you'll get some of those aches and pains and sorenesses that'll kind of come about. And then that's where, they're not going to just go away. You have to sort of do something about it. But ultimately, it all goes back to what you're doing when you're not playing baseball, exercises you're doing or stretches you're doing for you to be able to play. So I'd say probably not preparing enough.
One of the questions that I hear a lot from young players and parents as well is, at what age should my player, or should I as a player, start lifting weights? What are your thoughts on that?
As always, it's a case-by-case basis. It always depends. It's always the easiest answer to say, but it's true. Because I know I've had an athlete come in who, he played soccer, he wrestled and played baseball. So and in general, just the way that he moved when I was with him, he came in because his hip was hurting or something like that from wrestling. And the way that he moved, he almost looked like an adult that was just kind of shrunken down into a 10-year-old body. So someone like that who moves really well and can just they have a lot of good coordination, they can run well, they can skip and hop and jump and just be a general athlete. Those kids that can do those things well earlier on are probably going to get away with lifting weights sooner. And that's not saying, and none of this weightlifting stuff that I'm talking about is like maximum effort with the heaviest weight possible. It's not any sort of, like CrossFit or this or that. It's just general training at that age where you're having kids lift, half of their body weight or similar off of the floor in a deadlift position. And all of this should be sort of, coached and overseen by somebody who can help the athlete. So I would say I don't see anything necessarily wrong with like 12, 13, sort of where you start to play around with some things and get introduced to some of the lighter weight things, body weight things when you're that age. And then just over time, as you get comfortable doing it, you build up and do it. Because the earlier you sort of start doing and introduce some of these things, and you can kind of focus on technique, you can focus on making sure that they're safe while exercising. It makes it so much easier when you're in high school, when you're a sophomore, junior, senior, and you're trying to get to the next level. And some of the, you shouldn't be starting right then and there with some of these things, because they could take some time to learn, just sort of technical, how you move and how to even just do a proper warm up. Like those things are pretty foundational, and those often take some time to develop when you're 12, 13 years old, and then it gets easier as you get older.
You mentioned about being an athlete. What are your thoughts on sports specialization? That's a hot topic these days with kids and their parents, for that matter.
Yeah, whenever I talk about things like this, I always try and think of both ends of the argument, right? So for someone like myself in my field, it's always something that we're talking about with sports specialization, which would just mean you're playing only one sport, you're playing it as much as you can all year round, and you don't really do much else besides that physically. Like maybe you have your phys ed classes and everything like that, but you're really only playing, let's say, baseball. And that's something that probably started happening more and more, maybe like 15 to 20 years ago. Jim, you probably have a better idea with that, where it's going to clinics and camps in the spring, summer, fall for baseball. And then there's indoor things you can do in the Northeast where you're literally probably playing baseball 10, 11, 12 months a year. And that, from a health standpoint, if you want to be a healthy athlete for the longevity and the long haul, that's not really the best way to go. And there's some pretty cool statistics in some of the professional sports drafts where the vast majority of athletes that make it to that high level, and even to college too, I'm sure, are playing 2 or 3 sports at the varsity level when they're in high school. So that's something that we're always trying to do, is have kids diversify their movement patterns so they're not just throwing all year long, especially at a younger age. And if you think about it, like the professional athletes, professional baseball players are playing over 162 games a year when you include spring training, and that's a lot of games. And some athletes, at the ages of some of the kids on here, are playing surprisingly like close to that, and they don't even realize, because they're playing all spring, they're playing all summer, all fall, and tournaments here and there, and they're playing a lot of them also over a weekend. They might play 4 or 5 games, and so in general, you want to play different sports all year round, because the best athletes are going to become the best baseball players. And you can kind of see that when you get up to the major league levels. Most major leaguers have played multiple sports. And then I could think about it too on the other side of the argument. If you really want to get good at something, you have to practice it, right? It's something that you have to focus on a lot. And now we're seeing more and more showcases and specialized clinics for specific skill, like hitting or pitching or certain pitches or whatever it is. And I can also see where those things have a place too, because if everyone is doing it and you eventually don't do some sort of specialization around 15, 16, 17 years old, just kind of depends on how you're recruited and things like that. If you're not doing those things, then you probably will fall behind the people that are doing those things. So, sort of 2 sides of the coin there, but hopefully that kind of gives a better sort of idea of what I would want to do. Let's say with my son, I'd probably have him play as many sports as possible, whatever he likes to do, whatever he has fun doing and he wants to do all the time, where he's not just stuck inside all day. And then, when you start to get looks from college programs or the pros, that's probably a good time to start to say, okay, let's, focus on some specific skill type things, and maybe, stop playing football or stop playing whatever other sport, and just play it more recreationally, like just go play some pickup hoops in the driveway or whatever it is.
I can tell you, and parents who are on now, when my son was 10, 11, 12, and Greg, my son Matthew, we couldn't get him to play. Well. He was baseball. That's all that he wanted to do. He did play pickup basketball. He'd go out with some friends and play touch football and things like that. He had more than one of the high school football coaches. As he got bigger, he had more than one of them come to him and say, what do you think about football? And in retrospect, with the back injury that he had, it's probably good that he didn't play football because it might have been worse. Many of the Cardinals players who are on know this, but my son, Matt, broke his back just before his junior year of high school. So he missed an entire season, and he went to Greg for his rehab, which is kind of why I was saying at the beginning of this call here, Greg is not somebody you want to have to meet because it means that you've been injured. That said, and obviously, Greg, nothing is foolproof, especially when it comes to sports and athletics.
Right.
But what do you think is the best way for a player to avoid getting injured in the first place?
I think it's sort of overall, generally speaking, it's a combination of sort of everything we've already spoken about, and then having a plan. Because again, I always think about who are the athletes that aren't in the facility already that we work with, and who are the athletes that are coming in with a new injury who I've never met before. And oftentimes, they don't really have a throwing program. They don't really have any sort of conditioning program. They don't have any sort of strength training program. And they kind of just go based on like, oh, today, it's nice out, so I'm just going to go throw. And, if you string 5 of those days in a row where you're throwing super hard and you don't have any sort of, like up and down in how hard you're throwing or how much you're throwing throughout the week, throughout the month, throughout the year, with some sort of built-in time off, that's definitely going to be something that catches up to you. And like I said before, if you feel good, if we took any one of you guys right now and just started having you throw every single day for a month, you probably feel okay. Like it would probably be fine for a while, but eventually you're going to be like, man, I'm sore today. And then you're going to throw. And then it's like, oh, the soreness is still here the next day. Because you don't have some sort of plan set in place. And it doesn't have to be anything crazy. There's no one plan that is the best plan. We can have all these different recommendations, and it can be based on your school, or it could be based on other sports you're playing. But ultimately having a plan for as many of the different factors that go into your performance and your health, the better off that you can be. You just want to try and control as many of the variables as you can.
The players who were in our Cardinals winter training pitching program have an idea of what you were talking about because we had them on a gradual throwing program, and they were doing some core exercises, doing some form running and things like that. We had a lot of band work. We used Jaeger bands almost exclusively through the program. So the idea was to get them ready to throw anywhere, depending upon their age, anywhere between 45 and 60 pitches by the time the season started. Now, obviously, everything got put on hold. And some of our parents and players may have seen something in the news over the past week or so from Yankees head team physician, Dr. Christopher Ahmad, about how when we start coming back, we could see an increase in arm injuries. And I know you spoke with one of Dr. Ahmad's associates, Frank Alexander, the other day. What did Frank have to say about that?
Yeah, so and it was a good conversation because, again, like I could see both sides of the argument being true in different scenarios, different cases where maybe you have an athlete, we're talking Major League Baseball players now, right? So if we have a Major League Baseball player who comes into spring training and maybe his plan wasn't long enough or he didn't have enough time to build up for whatever reason so that he feels like he's ready to go, or he's, structurally and functionally, he can move all his body parts the way he needs. Maybe he didn't do exactly what he needed, and there's some missing pieces there. If he then goes and pitches, those are where some of those athletes might have injuries earlier on. And usually the month of May is when there's the most injuries in professional baseball. And I would think it's probably because, again, like you can kind of get by through March, get by through April, feeling pretty good, and then things start to kind of catch up with you a little bit. So with all of this off time, if you are that same athlete and you still don't prepare the same way that you were supposed to for spring training, and then you continue to do that same thing for months, then there's less, it's almost like you've just prolonged your lack of preparation. So it's like you've done less for longer, which is going to be worse in the long run. So those same athletes might have those same injuries, when it comes to August, if they start in July, let's say. As opposed to something we were talking about, with Frank, maybe you're an athlete who does really well with your physical preparation and you do really well with your arm care. Your conditioning is great. You're strong. You move really well. You're athletic. And maybe you do that now for a longer period of time because you have more time to prepare for the season. You just don't know when it's going to start. So you have to keep up with that stuff, and you're throwing one bullpen every week, and you're hitting, and you have other people that are throwing to you, so you're seeing live pitching. If you're one of those types of people, I would say you're probably going to be healthier. You probably have the reduced injury risk, let's say. So it could sort of be like both ends of the continuum there, where we see a positive and a negative. So I don't really know how it's going to go, but I think it'll probably all average out to something similar. That was what I would think, something similar that will see injury rate wise.
For our players and parents who have been on so far and they've seen, hang on one second here, they've looked in the chat. You'll see a document that Greg put in here, and this has stuff on different things that you can do during this time. Make sure you're preparing, get outside, run around, play multiple sports, throwing, what you can be doing, playing light catch.
And this is probably a little bit more geared towards the older athlete, just because of some of these distances on here for the throwing. When you get down into like the running section, it might be, it's a little bit different probably when you're younger. You can do other things that kind of replace some of the things that might be on this program. But this would be a plan that would probably be more so for, middle school or high school athlete, college athlete.
One of the things that's down here is the Throwers 10, and Greg and I were talking about this earlier in the week. Throwers 10, I think the high school players probably know this because I gave this out to some of them earlier over the winter, but it's a series of exercises that you can do with resistance bands and light dumbbells. It's one of the best programs I've seen out there.
Yeah, so that program, to me, a lot of these arm care exercises, it's almost like we need to do something, right? So like I was saying earlier, if you don't have any plan, if you don't have anything to follow, you're kind of just, you have no idea what to do. You're stuck in the dark there. So the Throwers 10 is something that's been out for a long time, and it's almost like a good entry point for someone who hasn't done any of this type of arm care exercises before, things like bands and light dumbbells. So for some of the younger baseball players in here, that might be a good thing to start with. Have your parent go find you the Throwers 10 program and just start practicing some of those things. And you don't have to do all of it in one day. You can kind of split it into different days if you want, but it's almost like, let's check the box. Let's make sure that you're doing something, because doing nothing is worse, and doing just a bunch of random things is also probably worse. So besides that, then it kind of goes into like the last bullet on there. I just wrote like additional things you can do: bear holds, trunkless, armbar screwdrivers, and carries. Those are things we have over 400 or so videos on our YouTube channel that you could find some of these different exercises. And those would be sort of things you can do when you get a little bit older, you get a little bit more experience with a Throwers 10 program type of approach. And maybe you're in some sort of strength and conditioning type program, those would be some good options to add as well.
And there are more exercises that Greg has here. And again, depending upon how old you are, we talked last week, Greg, in our Cardinals call about baseball being a game where you're going in distances of 60, 70, or 90 feet, depending upon the size of the field that you're on. For anybody who's not able to download this, I will have this available for you a little bit later on today. I'll also have the Throwers 10 program. And if for some reason you do need to connect with Greg, this is the best way to do it. Again, with locations in Manhattan and Chatham here in New Jersey. If you're familiar with the Annex training facility that Mickey Bruckner runs, that's where Resilient is located. So there's a chance that you've actually, if you work out there, that you've actually seen Greg and didn't even realize it. They're on Instagram, Facebook, as well as Twitter, and you can always email Greg there as well. And again, it's the type of thing where you hope you don't have to go to him, because if you're going to him, it probably means that you're hurt. So it's everybody's best interest that you stay as healthy as possible. I can tell you from personal experience, Greg beats me up on it about once a week or so. We did it twice this past week. I'm desperately trying to avoid a third knee surgery. I think I'm failing at it miserably, but but it is actually helping. So I sent my son to Greg. I took myself to Greg. So I trust Greg implicitly with various parts of my body.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much. Yeah, and the good thing with all of this, with the whole pandemic and everything, good thing about the way that we operate, we only see one person at a time. So we don't have, there's not a room full of, 20 people who are there for their therapy or an exercise program. We're seeing everybody one-on-one, and we have a ton of cleaning supplies and everything, and gloves and masks like Jim knows here. So yeah, so again, like Jim said, hopefully you don't have to see me. But I also do see athletes who are healthy, so to speak, and just might not be able to move certain ways that they need to, and they might need certain stretches that they otherwise aren't familiar with. So just sort of, kind of depends on what you need. But yeah, always here, always available for any questions if you want to send anything over. And my email address is somewhere. Or yeah, send a question to Jim. He can filter it over to me.
And again, this is the email address I would ask you to use. You may have a different address for me if you have my personal address, but this is where I do my baseball stuff. baseballworkoutzone@gmail.com. So if you need the slides that Greg put together for today, or you want the throwers 10, or also if you still need the band exercises that we put out the past couple of weeks, I can get those to you as well. Again, that's baseballworkoutzone@gmail.com. Greg, thank you so much for coming on today. It's been a lot of great information for our players and parents, and for me as well. I never stop learning.
Absolutely. Thank you, Jim.